Hi, I'm Neill Franklin, the current Executive Director for the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, and I'm coming to you today from Baltimore. I want to begin with thanking Bobby for inviting me to speak at this important town hall. These are trying times in our country, and we need to make the best of what's before us. I can talk all day for hours about drug war, prohibition policies, and policing, but Bobby's only given me 10 minutes. So let me get right into it. I'm very happy with my 10 minutes, by the way. I want to touch on three basic areas: policing, public policy, and social justice. I'll begin with the obvious: policing and recent relevant events. There's no way to cover policing history during the next few minutes, but trust me, policing history is very important for the police reform movement to be productive. It helps to know how you got to where you are. And in short, the United States policing model was not designed for the benefit of black people. It was designed for the benefit of the rich in protecting their property and keeping slaves in their place. For the benefit of the rich in protecting their property. Yes, slaves were property. Then when slavery ended, the police continued with their duty of keeping blacks in their subservient place, which brings us to where we are today. There's much more to say about policing, but I'll segue here to discuss the current treatment of black men and women by the policing organism. And yes, I said organism. It's like a single-cell animal existing only for the benefit of itself. Just a few years back, during my lifetime, when black men began joining police forces here in the United States, so I'm talking about the 1950s, black police officers couldn't ride in patrol cars in many of the cities across this country. They couldn't carry sidearms. They couldn't police in white neighborhoods. And yes, they certainly couldn't arrest white citizens. Internal racism among the ranks was running rampant. And if you think that it has ended, answer this question for me. Why are there so many employee groups of color in this country today for policing? So for instance, we have the National Black Police Association. We have the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. We have the National Latino Officers Association. And there's association after association after association. This was because the Fraternal Order of the Police, which is a long-standing police employee group, union, they would not represent blacks and Latinos for their benefit. My point is this: how do you get representation from basically a white organization for charges of racism? It didn't happen. So in order for black folks and Latinos to get a fair shake in promotions and assignments and evaluations and more, they had to form their own organizations. And these organizations exist today, and they are still fighting for equal treatment within the ranks. If you can't end racism internally among the ranks, you will never end it in the streets with black citizens. And here we are with yet more black folks dying at the hands of white police officers. Until we undergo serious reconstruction of American policing, we need to act. Before I get into public policy, here are just a few things that we can and should do. Transparency, for instance. Do you know that the internal affairs records, and I'm not talking about personnel records per se, I'm talking about internal affairs records, which they try to consider and classify as personnel records. I'm talking about excessive force allegations. I'm talking about corruption. I'm talking about lying on official documents. In most states across this country, that information is sealed from the public. The public needs to have access to this information so that we know the conduct of the police officers, the character of the police officers who are working within our communities. Accountability. Every police agency in this country should have a policy, the duty to intervene. So if a police officer witnesses another using excessive force, committing a crime, and more, they need to report that and they need to deal with it. They need to stop it. That needs to be required. Use of force standards. We need to improve our use of force standards. At the very least, there should be a duty to attempt to de-escalate the situation before you use force. We don't have that right now. And finally, for the few that I'm mentioning, databases. We need a national database to track every police officer that's been fired for things like excessive force, corruption, lying on official documents and in court, and more. That way, we can track and prevent these officers from being rehired at another police agency across state lines or even right around the corner in the next town. So, we can also reduce the need, so now I'll get into public policy. We can also reduce the need for citizen police contact. There are many pieces of public policy to discuss regarding this, but I'm going to focus on just one in particular, and that's marijuana prohibition. The police are still making hundreds of thousands of marijuana possession arrests each year, even with the reforms that we've made in many states across this country with legalization. There are hundreds of thousands of unnecessary police-citizen contacts. And we know that whenever there is such a contact, especially with black citizens, such situations can go south very, very quickly. And before you know it, you have another dead black man or woman. We need to end marijuana prohibition like yesterday. We cannot have effective police reform with marijuana and other drug prohibitions intact. Finally, I need to talk about social justice. Over the past few prohibition decades, blacks have caught the brunt of failed prohibition drug war policies. For similar drug crimes, blacks are arrested at higher rates than whites, charged at higher rates, convicted at higher rates, and they receive longer prison sentences. And even in states with marijuana legalization, when arrests are made or civil citations are handed out, blacks are still disproportionately affected. This systematic racism has devastated black communities. For those arrested, jobs have disappeared, school loans are not obtainable, housing cannot be obtained, and families have been torn apart. Decades of failed drug policies have driven black communities deeper and deeper into economic ruin. As we move to completely end marijuana prohibition, we must invest in these communities and into the lives of those who are adversely affected. We need to ensure that laws permit previously convicted people of marijuana offenses. They must be able to obtain licenses and funding for their businesses. We must make industry jobs available and actively recruit black and brown folks. We must advocate for tax dollars to support neighborhood services critical to health and education, housing, jobs, businesses, and drug treatment. It will be these types of investments that prop up impoverished communities and improve public safety, all while dramatically reducing negative police-citizen interaction, especially in the black community. If we are in fact a country of principle and morals, this we will do. I want to thank you, and I wish you guys a very productive virtual town hall. Thanks again, Bobby.
And remember, it's www.walk4change.us.